Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in today and clicking on the video. We're going to continue keeping this series going of kayak camping and me just kind of prepping and getting ready for this big trip I got coming up. If you haven't seen the video before this, it was just me getting my kayak out of storage, and I'm getting ready to go on a 125-mile kayak trip on the Buffalo River in Arkansas. We're going to get it done in 6 days. We've allotted ourselves probably 7 days, but for sure 6. If not 5, depending on the water conditions. It's a really fast flowing river, and you can really get some mileage put underneath you. We're going to be trying to get about 20 miles done a day. That's about what we averaged last year. I did 60 miles last year, and the year before that we all did 47. So the guys that kept going after me and my buddy left last year ended up going the whole 125, and that's about what they averaged. So this year I'm in it for the long haul. I'm doing the whole thing. So currently this video is 10 days out. I just wanted to kind of do a general thing of what my top 5 kayak items are, and like what just the most important things that I've noticed the past 2 years of doing this, and really being out there on the water, not just kind of going for the day and finding a really nice, comfy camp spot and all of that has a nice fire pit and all that stuff. Like what we're doing is we don't know where we're going to be that night. We don't know where we're going to be sleeping. So we track on GPS and on the maps and kind of map what our mileage is. And then we give ourselves enough time to find a spot adequate to suit what we have. And majority of us will be doing tents. And other than that, it's just kind of the Wild West. We don't really have any kind of specific campsites. There's no water, there's no electricity. And on that note too, I want to kind of have a disclaimer out there before I get into what my opinion is of your top 5 most important items for kayak camping. I'm assuming that you already understand that your most important item is safety, as far as your PFD, your personal flotation device. You obviously have your boat. I'm not going to get into what boat's better or which one's, there's plenty of people that have given reviews and whatnot on different boats. And I'm also assuming that you know that you're going to need a paddle. Depending on the class of rapids, you can get into helmets and all of that. But for sure, I'm just throwing it out there in the beginning before I even start my list. I've already assumed that we're going to be wearing flotation devices, and that we're going to have our kayaks properly rigged, where if we're going to be out in the water at night, you're abiding by your state laws for the lighting or any kind of flags that you have to have. And again, whether you have to wear a helmet or whatnot, depending on the river that you're on. With those things in mind, let's jump right into the list. So I've kind of jotted down some notes here so I don't get too sidetracked, but I'll go ahead and give you the 5 items in my opinion and in order of my opinion. So number 1 on my list is sleep. That's at the top of my must-have, whatever items I need to have to get good sleep on a trip like this. That's at the very top. I think most of us as outdoorsmen or outdoorswomen really underestimate the benefits of a good night's sleep, and not even just a good night's sleep, but having that comfort of being at home and feeling safe and secure, and just the importance of being well rested and waking up the next morning and not feeling like a zombie, and not feeling worn out and dragged down. Especially, like I said, if you're doing a long trip like this where you're out there for 6 days, 20 something miles a day, you're exhausted when you get back, and the last thing you want is to find out your first night, the rest of the trip, you're not comfortable where you're going to be. So sleep is number 1 on my list, and I'm going to go into more of these in detail and kind of show you some gear and stuff too. All right, number 2 are dry bags. And not all dry bags are created equal. If you don't have any experience with dry bags, it's better to buy once and cry once over your price and have them for years and years and years and years later, instead of cutting the corner and getting a cheaper dry bag and just hoping that it works. Because no matter how much testing you do at home, if you put all your clothes or whatever you absolutely don't want to get wet, like your bedding and your sleep gear, if you put all that in the dry bag that you just bought and throw it in the shower, being out there on the river, it's somehow still going to get wet if it's not a good quality dry bag. I try not to put too much of my gear on the outside of my boat. The stuff that is outside of my boat is really only 2 items, and I'll go over that in another video. But I intentionally do that because I want 2 layers of waterproof protection for my items. The dry hatch on my boat is very well resistant to water. It hasn't leaked on me yet. I know a lot of kayaks eventually will. If they don't brand new, they will, because you're constantly in the sun. There's exposure and heat, and that rubber gasket on the inside of your hatch lid will leak. And so I would rather put most of the stuff that I don't want to get wet in that hatch, that dry hatch, and on top of that have it in a high quality dry bag. All right, number 3 is rain gear. On this trip, it's not a matter of if it's going to rain, it's just when. And as much as, you think it's fun to jump in the river and swim and get back in your boat and paddle, that's perfect for the day. That might even be great for an overnight trip. Your trip's shorter and that you can bring 2 pairs of clothes and you're good. But for something like this, where it's extended over multiple days, for me, it's really an inconvenience to either, one, come home with 6 pairs of change of clothes that are all soaking wet, because you're going to get wet throughout the day. You're going to hit rapids. You're going to hit parts of the river where the water comes over the boat and it gets your pants legs wet. Or I even had one year where moisture wicked up my pants from where they were getting wet down below, and eventually they were wet all the way up to my thighs and my crotch area just from it wicking up. Having rain gear really saves you, and good quality rain gear that doesn't leak, because you know that, okay, my seat might be wet or my legs might be a little wet from water splashing me, but my torso's still dry, and I can put this jacket on when it starts pouring rain and I'm paddling and we're trying to get our miles in. I'm still going to stay dry. And when I get to camp, the only thing I got to do is get out of these wet pants. That kind of goes along with my philosophy of your clothing too. I'll kind of just make that 2-in-1, rain gear and clothing. For something like this, light, quick drying clothing is just king for me, and something that it doesn't weigh a whole lot when it gets wet. I've made that mistake already of wearing canvas pants and even jeans that when they get wet, they get heavy, they take forever to dry out, and by the time you're done with your trip, your clothes aren't going to be dry. So getting stuff that's lightweight, like lightweight ripstop pants, or the lightweight fishing pants that have the zippered legs, and lightweight shirts and stuff, they just go hand in hand with good rain gear. And the reason why it's important to not just paddle in the rain soaking wet is a couple of reasons. One is when you get back, and you're ready, you're exhausted, you're ready you get to your campsite for that night, you're exhausted, all you want to do is go to sleep. It's a hassle to have to either be in wet clothes and set up all of your dry bedding and trying to keep the inside of your tent dry, or it's a hassle to have to go and change into dry clothing and then set all your stuff up. So it's easier to just put your rain gear on and stay dry. And then the second part of that is, last year when it came time for us to leave, when me and my buddy Clint, it came time for us to leave, I was wet and he was wet, and the guys said goodbye and they kept going, and we went to get the truck and all that, and we were actually starting to shiver, and it couldn't have been colder than 70 degrees. It had to have been like mid 70s, but because we were soaking wet and we had stopped moving and we were down in this valley and the water was cold, it doesn't take long for you to start feeling that cold and even potential life-threatening stuff like hypothermia. So high quality rain gear and quick dry clothing and stuff is just makes the trip so much better. All right, the fourth thing is footwear, and this is something I think I finally got figured out. It's taken me to my 3rd trip to finally figure out what I wanted. But the first year I tried wearing waterproof boots. Like I had 2 pairs. I had like muck style boots that come up to your middle of your shin, and then I actually had was supposed to be Gore-Tex waterproof boots. Horrible idea. Not only am I now having to fool with changing out socks because your feet are wet every day at the end of the day, and it only takes a couple of days of your feet being wet before you start having blisters and sores and even like trench foot in serious cases. It also, they never dried out. A lot of those boots that are Gore-Tex, they're perfect until they hit their limit or water goes over the top of where the Gore-Tex lining is and the inside gets wet, and it's never going to dry out. It'll take forever, especially if you're not having 4 or 5 hours each night with a big fire and getting to dry stuff out. We only had a fire the first night, the first year that we went. And the last thing, number 5, is easy to prepare food and snacks. I see a lot of people that, again, are just out for the day, or they're out for just 2 or 3 days, and most of the time it's people that are in canoes, and that's a whole different thing. I mean, we could do a whole nother video series on canoes. I see a lot of people that just bring way too much than what they actually need when it comes to food and snacks. And what I mean by that is just huge coolers and like 50 water bottles and just all this stuff that not only leads to like more trash on the river. It's hard enough to not see trash wherever we go in the woods, but it could lead to more trash on the river. It's a lot of weight that you don't have to have with you, and that extra weight goes hand in hand with you're having to carry that now. You're having to either carry it up a hill to your campsite, or you're having to paddle it. And if you hit a dead spot in the river to where the current's real slow and the water's real deep, that extra weight catches up to you pretty quick, especially the longer the trip goes on. By day 4 and day 5, when the end is near and you're still having a blast, but you've been paddling hard for 4 days straight, having that big Yeti cooler or whatever it is in your boat will really affect your drag in the boat, and it'll really affect how that boat tracks in the water and how much water you can cover. Those are my top 5 things: sleep, dry bags, rain gear, footwear, and easy to prepare food and snacks. I'm going to bring you down to the table, and I'm actually going to go through and break these categories down and show you some examples of what I'm talking about.